Welcome. I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. At the beginning of this video and every video, I like to remind you to grab a pen and a notepad so that you can take down some notes. I want you to jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today. That's what this is all about. I want to try to inspire you to do something to move your business forward today. Now, I also want you to manage by the rule, not the exception. Are you familiar with this expression? Most of you have heard this. Manage by the rule, not the exception. And what it means is that you should ensure that there is some form of congruence between your long-term management philosophy and strategy, your decision making, and with what normally happens, with the usual market conditions. That is, you should not form and inform your management decisions and strategy by those things which may occur intermittently or very rarely, especially. Now, knowing what it means is one thing, but why does the expression exist? I think the reason the expression exists and why we need to be reminded of this is much more important. And the reason that the expression exists and that you need to be reminded of this from time to time is that we have a tendency, we have a temptation occasionally to manage by the exception. So what happens in your business is something occurs, and I'm suggesting once again that this is something that's out of the ordinary, very unusual, and there is pain associated with it. It's bad for business, and you get some sort of negative consequence and effect associated with this thing. So then you are very tempted to maybe put a policy in place, something to make sure that this never ever happens again. Now that's fine insofar as that decision does not affect other things, but that is almost never the case. Remember, when we put policies and we make, sort of rules, we put these in place, there's always unintended consequences. That's the problem with central authority. Remember, you're not omniscient. You don't know everything at all times. And so anytime you put something into place, a rule, a policy, there is almost assuredly going to be some sort of unintended consequence, something that it will impact an effect that you had not considered at the time. So resist the temptation to do that. So again, it's okay if somehow you know for sure that you are not going to suffer any unintended consequences of the policy. But that's not why the expression exists. The expression exists because what we do, we are tempted, we put these policies in place, we make decisions based on a one-off situation, and in doing so, we affect the rule. The exception ends up adversely affecting the rule. You'd never want that to occur. Additionally, these things that occur, sometimes they are outside of your control. And since we know that you should focus on those things within your control, you really don't want to spend too much of your time, too much of your effort, your brain power, worrying about those things that can occur from time to time that really impact your business in an adverse way. And when you plan for that, you're focusing your attention in the wrong areas. Instead, focus your attention on the usual, those things that occur day to day, and what ways can you improve your business with the usual set of circumstances. Now, I understand that you want to protect yourself and your business against catastrophic failure, catastrophic loss. And so we can talk a little bit about that. Those black swan events that occur that may put you out of business. So you can put policies in place to protect against that, but that's not usually what we're talking about in this case. So let's try to delve into an example or two to give you an idea, so it doesn't sound like we're talking out both sides of our mouth here. When people say manage by the rule, not the exception, it may be a situation, for example, where a customer takes advantage of your business and it in effect steals from you or sets up a situation that is not fair. And you look at it, and if he's a real outlier if this situation is very rare and you've operated in one way for a long time and that's never occurred, then your temptation would be to manage by that exception because it's so fresh in your mind. You just felt the pain of that situation. So you may be tempted to put a customer service policy in place, share that with your team and say, we only do this, we have a maximum of this many days that we'll do money back guarantee, and so on. But that is exactly what you don't want to do. You want to view that customer as an outlier, as an exception, and think, that's not going to put us under. The guy took advantage of us. Most people are not like that. The rule is most customers want to deal fairly with us as we do with them, and therefore we will keep our policies to support the rule, not the exception. Now you can empower your team to make rules for those outliers, to make judgment calls on the spot, but don't put any long-term management strategies in place, don't make any long-term decisions, and don't put a policy sort of written in stone and guide your people by that. Another situation I've observed over the years is that a staff or team member may take advantage of the organization in some way. And so management is very tempted, once again, to manage by the exception, not the rule. We're gonna put some policy in place to make sure that no one in the future can burn us the way this one guy did. And again, that's managing by the exception, not the rule. It's not a good policy. Maybe that person, whatever they did was outside of your control. Of course, you can't control other people, and you're tempted to say, well, what I can control is our policy. But as Dr. Stephen Covey says, where mores are sufficient, laws are unnecessary. Where mores are insufficient, laws are unenforceable. So if you've got somebody who's willing to take advantage of you, to try to look for the loopholes and get away with something, putting all the policies you want in place are not going to work. A person's just gonna always look for a way around them. So it doesn't matter on the stakeholder, if this is a customer or a staff member. Instead, manage the outliers, deal with them, divide and conquer, deal with them individually. I've been in so many meetings where a new policy is being announced or whatever, and it's being addressed to the team, or maybe you've received a memo in an organization that you've been with before, and it's addressed to everyone, and it impacts everybody. The change affects everyone, but it's really meant to deal with the exception. And you're thinking, why do I have to now have a loss of some freedom or liberty that I used to have because somebody took advantage of the system? And one bad apple, so to speak. And that is an example of people managing by the exception, not the rules. Instead, what you should do is, instead of addressing your whole team and changing a policy, you should find those outliers. You should find those people where the mores are insufficient, take them aside and explain your expectations, and draw some boundaries, some lines in the sand, and deal with it that way on a one-off situation for a one-off individual. And that is a far better management strategy. Just always resist. That's why I think a default position for you should be, I'm going to resist the urge to ever put a policy in place. I can communicate with people. I can address a team and say, this is really unfortunate that this happened. Guys, that's not the culture we want. And please, if you have a better way of doing things, give us some feedback so we can improve. But don't launch a new policy. You see this in government all the time. As something happens, there is a unusual situation, all of a sudden everybody's got their ideas how we'll never make this happen again. And all they're doing is they're compounding the effect, the negative effects, the adverse effects of rules and more legislation and everything, and it never ends. So don't run your business that way. You will always have unintended consequences, and you will create an environment and a culture within your organization that people don't appreciate. Instead, you want one with more freedom and liberty, with people having some more autonomy and the ability, the empowerment to do things, to move forward in your business, to drive your business forward and help you innovate. And the degree to which you create that culture will pay big dividends in what you get back from your team. Conversely, if you create a culture of, well, every time something goes wrong, we put a new policy in place, and you're very constricting in your management style, you're going to set up a situation where you have very little empowerment. People will not feel free to innovate, and you're going to stifle creativity. Now, my two examples of stakeholders that were outliers that did something that adversely affected your organization and tempted you to put a policy in place, you can appreciate that you can pull those people aside, at least assuming you're able to do an investigation and find out where the source of the problem is. And maybe it's not just one individual, maybe it's two or three. You can still use that divide and conquer. If it's a customer situation, you can handle those individually. But sometimes it's a market condition, an environmental situation, and it's outside of your control. And I want to give you some advice on how to do that. In those cases, again, you want to manage by the rule, not the exception. And that's what insurance is for. That's why you would have an insurance policy, to protect yourself, to protect your business and those stakeholders that rely on your business against a catastrophic black swan type event that could ruin you, that could bring you under or take a long time from which to recover. So consider, if you really experience something, whether it's flood or something from the environment, natural disaster, or death of a key stakeholder in your organization, that kind of thing, you can deal with these things with insurance policies. That's what they're for. I mean, you're not supposed to purchase insurance as a lottery ticket. You're not hoping to cash in on the insurance policy. You have it to prevent these black swan events, these catastrophic and rare incidences from occurring and really devastating your business. So use insurance instead, sort of set it and forget it. You don't want to have to focus on that. So you have an expense and you've directed a certain part of your revenue towards making sure that you can sleep at night and you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. That's what insurance is for. I realize that there are some investment strategists who are black swan strategists, and they are able to be very successful in business betting on black swan, very severe events that are catastrophic happening in a market or in society in general, and they invest in such a way that they lose a little bit of money continuously, but they make a ton of money when the black swan event occurs. But that's not most of you. Most of you are running businesses that don't, that's not your strategy. And so that's not what we're talking about today. If you can figure that out and you're very bright and you're really good with the numbers and you can you've discovered a strategy for looking for black swan events and you're going to short the market, so to speak, and bet on the black swan for occurring, there's nothing wrong with that, and go ahead and do that. That is a form of managing by the exception, not the rule. But that is not most of you. Most of you should manage by the rule, not the exception, and don't be tempted. So often these also occur, I've noticed very recently, when there's a bit of a binary. So you're at a fork in the road, and you think, well, I have to make a decision. Should we go this way or that way? And you look and you're weighing the pros and cons of which direction to go with this particular management, this business decision. And you think, well, if I go this way, I'll get the benefit of X, Y, Z. However, I will get the adverse reaction of A, B, C. But if I go that way, if I go the other way, I'm going to get whatever benefit. You can see where I'm going to go with this. Right away, what you should be doing is considering how often is that adverse reaction or that negative situation going to arise that you might want to try to manage around. If it's probably not very often at all, and maybe it's not even that big a deal at all. What you have to do is you have to, again, start to weigh these things. That's what managers do, is you go, okay, well, how big? Is it catastrophic? Is it going to bring us down? Or is it a minor inconvenience? And how often does it occur? Feel free to plot this on a graph and take a look at it. And go with the rule. Each and every time, go with the rule, not the exception, unless that exception is a real black swan, catastrophic type thing that could bring you under, in which case you should divide and conquer if it's related to an individual, and insure against it. You can put a little bit of money aside each time that you do a particular transaction. Maybe that doesn't make sense to you, but we've talked in other videos about where you can sort of accrue towards a catastrophe fund, for a rainy day fund. You put money aside with each transaction that you do, maybe every sales transaction, and you use that to help mitigate against those occurrences that are demanding of finances and resources that you don't have on at the drop of a hat ordinarily, save for the rainy day, so to speak. And that's a really good idea in terms of some accruals to set that kind of stuff aside. But when you reach these forks in the road, these binary decisions, managed by the rule, not the exception. The other notion I wanted to share with you is that you can start to, once you are really good at managing your time and you're very effective as a manager, and you've sort of been chopping away at all those things on your priority list, and you're working on that most important stuff, there are diminishing returns. That is to say that your expectation of the return you're getting on your investment in improvements is going to naturally be smaller. Now, at scale, it might be huge, but in individual occurrences, it might be very, very tiny. That's why really big companies will spend the time to save just pennies on transactions, because at scale, when you multiply that by many, many, many transactions, that adds up to a lot of money saved and gained, so to speak. And this is a natural occurrence. As your business grows and as you become more effective as a manager, you're going to notice that you're not getting these big, huge improvements every time you make a management decision. And as that occurs, you may start to think, well, is this managing by the exception? Because now I'm starting to focus my attention on things that don't happen very often. And no, that again is not what we're talking about today. You can start to focus your attention on things that are smaller and smaller. Improvements that may only affect your operation occasionally. That's okay. Because what it's not doing, it is not displacing resources from another needed area. And that's what is really the problem with managing by the exception, not the rule, is you're diverting your attention from where it is most needed on those things most important on your list, at the top of your list, those most important things to driving innovation and improving value of your products or services within your business. Those things need your attention, they need your focus, they need your resources. But the degree to which you've started to check those off and go through them, and you're working your way further down the list, you're going to find, and your list always, things are always working their way up the list, but you're going to find that the things on your list have a diminishing return. That is, they have lesser and lesser impact on your business, and that's okay. That's to be expected, and that's sort of a symptom of you're doing a really good job in management. Or it could be a symptom of you're not doing a very good job of plotting your priorities on a priority matrix and planning your time. But if we say, for the sake of argument, you're good at that and your business is going really well and you're working on some things that are sort of very sporadic, and you're focusing on improvement efforts that are going to have very small returns, that's okay if those are still the best thing, the most important thing on your list. And that is not an example of managing by the exception. So I think that's where I want to leave it today, and I wanted to give you that idea because I witnessed this recently and speaking with somebody, and a decision was made, and I thought, they sort of did that thing, that fork in the road, and considered the pros and the cons of which way to go. And it seemed to me that maybe they put too much emphasis on the disadvantage or the inconvenience they would have, and did not sort of look at that through the lens of, well, how frequent is that? And then maybe look for a smaller solution, some sort of insurance policy to deal with that, as opposed to make the major decision going forward in that way. And I'm sorry, sometimes without the example, it gets a little abstract and maybe hard for you to visualize that. But this is meant for you to think about in your business. Where does this happen? I'm going to make a decision. And the real default position I'm encouraging each of you to do is don't put a policy in place. Sort of, have best practices. And a best practice is to manage by the rule, not the exception. Don't put things in place and suffer unintended consequences down the road. Decentralize, get feedback from your team. All these types of things we talk about over time. I'm curious if, I really hope you got something out of this. Do you agree with this? Can you recall a time within your career that you managed by the exception and it did produce some unintended consequence, some adverse reaction that you really wish you could take back? And are you really practicing, managing by the rule, not the exception, and gaining the benefit of that? If you are, either way, leave a comment. If you completely disagree with me, leave a comment. Leave a comment that we can all learn from, because we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.